Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's Omnibus edition. It has been another full-on crazy week full of crazy, starting off with that alt-right attack on Benjamin Doyle and ending with the results from the Select Committee process for the Treaty Principles Bill, which showed that 90% of submitters told ACT and David Seymour to go and suck it. Yeah, it's a very resounding, overwhelming response. So, of course, the alt-right followers on places like Twitter are saying, well, now you shouldn't be afraid of a referendum. Nobody's afraid of a referendum, but the whole point of this process was to see whether or not maybe there should be one. Clearly there shouldn't, because the overwhelming majority of people told you to fuck off. So do that. Just fuck off. Go find somewhere else to live and leave the rest of us alone to work through the issues that we've got here. That would be great. Anyway, check out this week's Omnibus. Don't forget to hit that like button or share the video or subscribe to the channel, or why not even consider becoming a member? It's like $3 a month and you get to see most things early, and I'm in the process at the moment of working on my first members only live stream. Not quite sure how we're going to do that, but yeah, planning. And hopefully I'll have a few more extra crispy surprises coming up this week, but I'll let you in on those details later on in the week. In the meantime, enjoy this week's Omnibus. Hello there, kia ora. Look, I'm going to level with you, okay? I was considering doing some kind of April Fool's Day post for tomorrow. An update saying that I was going to be running in the local body elections as an ACT candidate, which I can clearly get away with because of the party's clear inability to vet candidates properly, from, the president down to the half a dozen people they had to pull out at the last election because ACT weren't in power yet and didn't want to scare away anybody who was thinking of voting for them who actually believed that they weren't at least a toe down the rabbit hole. But honestly, I couldn't do it. Not in a way that was any more ridiculous than what we've actually seen in the past few days from the government. Like Nicola Willis, whose big grand announcement on how making grocery prices fairer by maybe diversifying the supermarket duopoly that has been breathlessly run by media since Friday because Cabinet had signed off on the grand plan was to get more information. We had Chris Bishop on Q&A tell us that there hasn't been a rise in homelessness because of this government's much touted harsher approach to emergency housing, because that's what he'd heard. The minister used anecdotal evidence to back up his claims, which go in the complete opposite direction of actual research done by both Auckland Council, which has said that the number of people sleeping in cars, streets, and parks had risen 53% since September and January. And the Salvation Army's State of the Nation report, which identified tighter emergency housing criteria as a key contributor to the rising number of people who are living homeless on our streets. If your kitchen was on fire and a mate came up to you and said, well, I'd heard everything was fine, there's no fire issue, and the fire department came rushing in and said, why are you still here? There's a fire happening. Can't you see the flames and the smoke and hear all the alarms going off? You'd probably be more inclined to believe the fire department because of all the evidence. Unless you're a New Zealand First voter and you replace your mate in this scenario with Winston Peters, who this weekend went on the attack towards the boss of Kiwibank for a post showing that he values diversity in his workplace, which Winston took exception to. Surely the head of the bank should be focusing on the cost of living crisis. This from a Deputy Prime Minister who last week accepted a pointless petition from the J.K. Rowling fan club known as Speak Up for Women, a TERF group who spread hate and disinformation about trans women. This was after his State of the Union address, or nation, I don't know, I think he gets the two confused as well, where he talked about his war on woke, taking the country that he's been Deputy Prime Minister for 5 of the last 8 years back from whoever has it, and dribbling about DEI hires. But also before he decided to really push ahead with the latest cooker rage bait that we're sending $22 billion overseas because of the Paris Climate Agreement. Okay, quick side note, because I do love me a Terry Pratchett style footnote. Part of our 2016 Paris Agreement plan, which has been publicly available online since it was signed almost a decade ago, so therefore not a shock to anyone who can, Google things, they could hunt it down, is that we look at investment in ways of neutralizing our emissions with overseas projects, because a sudden and massive overhaul to our energy systems and other industries so that we reach that target that we agreed to would, at the very least, impact our economy in a negative way and give us negative GDP growth. And those overseas offsets are negotiable, but we have a short window for that negotiation left for this round. At the moment, most experts think we can still secure what we need overseas at the cost of just $3 billion over a decade. But the very worst case scenario is the one that a drunk foreign affairs minister might come up with who doesn't believe in man made climate change and is scared of people looking out for others in a kind and inclusive way. But that one would end up costing us around $23 billion over a decade. And that's according to this detailed report that came from Radio New Zealand, as well as a whole bunch of information from these government websites. Anyway, footnote over. And of course, he's now demanding we leave, and Seymour is flirting with the idea, all because Donald Trump has done so, and their voters are so misinformed about some really basic data that's been available for almost a decade in the public sphere. And of course, his most addle-pated followers lap it up and say things like, "It's about time," and "common sense at last," despite it being easily debunked, fabricated, worst-case scenario catastrophizing from this undisputed expert in catastrophizing scenarios. So, when it came to deciding if I did an April Fool's Day post, I decided, honestly, it was probably best to wait until Winston makes whatever big announcement he's making about the ferries today, which, the way things have been going at the moment is going to end up being something like the Poseidon Adventure, and that'll be enough of a joke for all of us. Hello there, kia ora. Oh, is that Henry Cavill in a comic-accurate Wolverine costume? Sorry, distractions. They're actually a really common political tool used in a huge number of situations. And this week in Parliament has kind of been all about using them. Remember the other day when Winston Peters announced smaller ferries with no costings attached and a relatively flimsy timeline that hasn't really been locked down? Well, after that fizzer of a press conference, he stormed out on mainstream media because they were asking him tough questions he didn't want to answer. To them, he went on to alternative media so he could continue attacking without pushback Green MP Benjamin Doyle and talk to his cooker fan base about anti-trans sentiment and puberty blockers and every other buzzword that scares them. And his fan base laps it up to the point where they think it's okay to send death threats based on what they've been told without actually having hard evidence. But they're not talking about the failure with the ferry announcement, are they? Or about how Peters was standing there slurring his words and stumbling on stage. He was screwing up the maps that he put up there. And with this, you can't bring up something like Tim Jargo with them because that's taken care of. So they don't talk about it now or when the name was first released. This week, we saw a huge range of changes come into effect that people want to be well aware of, but are getting distracted about. And they're going to impact people in some really interesting ways. And I don't mean this in a hyperbolic way. These are actual changes the government has made. April 1st saw a huge range of changes come into play that are going to impact us, like power surcharges that will be put onto power bills, putting them up at least $10 a month per household. In some areas, that's going to go up to by $25 a month. The new financial year saw the government not adjust repayment thresholds on student loan repayments, meaning that people will be paying more for those student loans, and not adjusting a working for family tax credit, which is going to see nearly 3,000 working for family recipients not getting a change in income and punished for trying to break the poverty cycle. The minimum wage goes up just 35 cents, well below the rate of inflation, meaning spending power decreases in real terms for those on minimum wage. Your ACC levy that's built into your wages goes up. And so too does landlord tax deductibility, which will be going up to 100%, which is going to cost the country an extra $165 million a year for landlords. How many people do you know that have felt that downward pressure that we were told about? Doctors are now walking away from hospitals because the workloads are becoming overwhelming. So the government puts out social media content to distract us, praising that the first round of new cancer drugs that they're funding are available this week, while conveniently forgetting to mention the fact that they were pressured into doing that after forgetting to put it into the last budget. Lots of changes. And while the government spins things like the 2001 Superannuation Act guaranteed rate increase on super as they're doing, people are feeling really shitty about things. Costs are constantly rising, and people feel like they're not being heard. We get examples of that as well, like how Christopher Luxon and David Seymour shrugged off the fact that 212,000 Treaty Principles Bill submissions are not going to be entered into the official record after last year and started this year telling us that the whole reason for the extended divisive process was to make sure everyone was heard and everyone could have their say. Only clearly that's not the case. So out come some distraction techniques because people are feeling bad and they blame the government, and the government's not doing the greatest in the polls. Like announcing a road cone Dobbin hotline because right-wing voters get so angry at them. Like, how dare you ensure the safety of people while putting together the work that's needed for the growth of the economy that the government keeps touting as our savior. A third of people are waiting 2 weeks to get in to see a GP. 1 in 6 people are waiting over a month. But Te Pāti Māori have the audacity to ask for enough time to prepare for seeing the Privileges Committee over performing a haka in Parliament. The Human Rights Commissioner put in the role against the recommendations of the Department of Internal Affairs, and despite very vocal concerns from the rainbow community, Muslim and Jewish groups, said racist comments about Muslims in a meeting with Jewish representatives that were there to warn him against mixing up anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and the widening field of racism that can cause. But KiwiRail paid for consultants hired to find more ways for the organisation to become more efficient, just 2 months before the government unexpectedly scrapped the original ferry plan that those consultants were needed to bring in to work around. Now, some people are more susceptible to falling for the distraction and focusing on those people. Well, it's really clear looking at the sort of people so expertly rage farmed over, say, Benjamin Doyle, for example, while they shrug off the confirmed actions of the former ACT Party president, ignored the erosion in democracy, ignored the extra costs forced on our lowest income earners, the problems with the crumbling health system being underfunded at a rate lower than inflation and population growth, and racism from the Human Rights Commissioner. But we should always be aware of everything that's going on and putting it into focus. It's performative, like, saying a road cone Dobbin line is something that's really more important to know about and hear from the government than why hundreds of thousands of public submissions are being tossed in the shredder. But another thing that we can do, another skill that we can all look at trying to improve, is recognizing the sort of people who do fall in and promote these distractions. It's always the same names, the same useful idiots on every social media channel. And sadly, the algorithms will ensure that they keep popping up. And while their content may be harmful, disingenuous, nasty, racist, homophobic, sexist, and just plain old wrong, it can be used as a litmus test of sorts to see what the distractions are the government wants you to pay attention to. And if you're really clever, which I know most of you are, you'll be able to work out from there what it is that they're hoping you miss. Hello there, kia ora. Well, the Cooker-in-Chief, our Deputy Prime Minister, took the stage today to slur and stumble his way through an announcement about ferries with as much solid detail as a 1970s Jell-O salad, where he confirmed that they would be smaller, rail-enabled, and we'd still be paying for some of the infrastructure upgrades that were going on under the plans the last government cancelled because of the cost blowout on infrastructure plans, apparently, with no costs or signed contracts to deliver at the same time that he was making these announcements to get a ferry that's going to end up being here 4 years later than the ones they cancelled. Well, next door, the Green Party were on the tiles on the Parliamentary Bridge telling the media that they've asked the Prime Minister to step up and pull Peters into line after a weekend of old man who doesn't understand the internet saw something he doesn't understand and told people who are triggered by their own ignorance things he didn't fully comprehend, and neither did they, resulting in the same group who relished in sending death threats to Jacinda Ardern, sending death threats to Green MP Benjamin Doyle. Now, there's a lot of moving parts here, and when you've had as much to drink as the Deputy Prime Minister, it can be a bit hard to keep track of it all. On their private Instagram page, Doyle had a carousel of multiple photos which included their child, their profiles being what is known in the queer community as ussified. It's a term which the American Dialect Society actually named as the Word of the Year in 2022 for the playful way it builds creative word use on social media spaces, which began initially as a portmanteau of 2 more raunchy words. In fact, the posts Peters is going on about are from 2022, the height of the ussification phase that was going on within the queer community at the time. Since people started death threats, though, to Doyle and their child, Doyle has chosen to remove the posts because it clearly impacts the safety of their child. On top of that, Doyle's profile had an emoji used by a number of Māori content creators because it looks like a kuru made of PowerShell. And there is no kuru emoji or anything that is commonly identified as a Māori identifying symbol, like the Tino Rangatiratanga flag. Doyle whakapapas te ngāpui, so the alt-right are claiming it's a symbol used by people who, well, people like former ACT President Tim Jargo. Not that they mentioned Jargo when that all came to light. In fact, disinformation media outlet Reality Check Radio has done at least 4 social media posts about the unsubstantiated allegations being thrown at Doyle, and they never did a single one on Tim Jargo. It's trial by social media based on hearsay, misdirection, and ignorance, while platforming people like Brian Tamaki when they say that they're protecting children, while overrunning a child's event at a library where they assaulted a child, and ignoring a right-wing political figure who was actually convicted and protected by the legal system. And we know this because of the interview that Winston Peters did with Sean Plunkett after storming out on media questions after his ferry announcement, where he used the opportunity to turn it into an issue with gender-affirming care and vilifying trans people. And the Prime Minister's response? Meh. Well, he thought Doyle should have used better language on their social media from before they were in the running to be an MP, a year before the last election. He said if one of his MPs had said something like that, then he would have expected better of them. In fact, here's the clip of exactly what he said.
All I'm saying to you is I thought the language was inappropriate. That's what I said. I said if one of my MPs had used similar language, I think you would be holding me to account and scrutinising it very strongly. I think the MPs would, and so would the public. No. Sorry, Jenna, last question.
He has at least one MP who beat a child with a bed leg, who faced no repercussions. Another who used their position as an MP to try and get her family out of animal abuse charges. One who leaked private information about a private citizen to alternative media. And another who was a member of the Destiny Church who stood up with sovereign citizens in Hamilton and claimed to be one of them after they issued pseudo-law execution writs against his co-workers at the time. All in their past as well. But he won't bring up their past actions or past judgment on them. But he had no plans to pull Winston in line. Because why would the Prime Minister step in over the Deputy Prime Minister doing something that works right-wing voters up enough to send death threats when it might risk the coalition? It's a very Lord Farquhar kind of, some of you may die, but that's a risk I'm willing to take approach. So, alt-right-wing trial by social media fed by an ecosystem of disinformation and cultural ignorance. Got it? Now, let's zoom out a bit more. Last week, we saw something similar happen to Green MP Tamitha Paul with a pile-on over deliberately misconstrued and misrepresented comments. We also saw the Newsweek start this week with another media attack on Golriz Graraman, dredging up text messages from Pack and Save Security wanting to target her. And all of this is underpinned with screams of, "We're not the violent ones, did you see what happened at Albert Park?" where the neo-Nazis showed up to support them and a horrible person got covered in tomato juice. And as far as I'm concerned, the librarians assaulted the Destiny Church members, despite what the video footage says. Selective memories and blinkered views to justify violent actions and outlooks based on rumours and the rumblings of a drunk uncle slurring and stumbling his way through a speech where he got Wellington and Picton mixed up when he was showing maps. It's clear there's an attack from the far-right party on the Greens right now. The media are being used, social media is being used, and the ignorance and self-righteousness of alt-right voters is being used and manipulated. No one should feel it's okay to send death threats, and no one should think it's okay to justify doing that. Not over unsubstantiated social media commentary, not over anything. But this is also the ecosystem we seem to live in now. Even Wayne Brown had to get extra security because of the threats from people. No one here wants to think we live in a country like this. As someone who's received death threats myself from Destiny fanatics and the alt-right over the content I make, I hate that we live in a country where the people who do this seem to get away with it and have the backing of some politicians and astroturf groups. We need to send a clear message to our political leaders that we want change. And part of that is some of the current lot need to at least be educated in how their amplified voices can cause real harm, or voted out if they continue to go out of their way to cause harm and make people fear for the lives of themselves and their children. Hello there, kia ora, and welcome to this week's The News. I'm Paul. Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, seen here emulating drag queen Scarlet Envy by asking, "Is it me? Am I the villain? I don't think I'm the villain," claimed this week that Labour and the Greens were quote-unquote playing politics by pointing out that 212 submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill wouldn't be entered into the official record in Parliament due to the sheer volume of responses, before caving and allowing it to go ahead on Thursday. That's right, the Prime Minister, who claimed he was a master negotiator before he caved to Seymour on forwarding the bill and allowing it to have the longest submission time while telling voters he didn't support it and it won't go anywhere, while also rushing unpopular and divisive policies through at breakneck speeds, is claiming others are playing politics by adhering to established practices within the parliamentary process. Late on Thursday evening, though, the government rescinded its decision and said it would allow submissions to be entered after it was pointed out that the committee was reporting back to the House a full month earlier than expected, allowing ample time to ensure the submissions became a matter of public record. On Friday, the Justice Select Committee made its formal recommendation that the Treaty Principles Bill be scrapped and not proceed. The committee received 307,000 submissions. Approximately 8% were in support of the bill, while 90% opposed and 2% had no definitive view. The committee report said it was clear that there was deep division over the bill, while a statistician from Victoria University said, 90% of people telling David Seymour to take his divisive bill and fuck off seems pretty fucking unified to me. Genesis Energy has increased its imported coal stockpile to get through expected increased winter demand. Said a spokesperson for Genesis, "Sure, we had permission to build solar and wind infrastructure for years and haven't gone ahead with it, which would have alleviated reliance on polluting fossil fuels, but it's much easier to charge people an extra $10 a month to pay for that in the future than work with other gentailers to future-proof our energy supply." Deputy Prime Minister Winston Peters, seen here trying to find out where in the small print it says there's no day service of alcohol on the train because he was sure that wasn't mentioned to him, has been getting louder in his calls to pull Aotearoa New Zealand out of the Paris Climate Accord, claiming that the country will be sending 22 to 23 billion to the United Nations to pay for it. The actual payments he's talking about are to offshore offset programs that would allow the country to transition to renewable energy options at a slower pace, so as not to shock the economy and impact GDP, and could be as low as 3 billion over 10 years if action was to begin into securing and negotiating contracts now. Said a spokesperson for Peter's office, "We know this is important to idiots that think woke is an insult and are the only voters who actually matter to us, so of course we're going to ignore facts and catastrophize the worst case scenario to keep them scared." After a week of making a big deal about Cabinet's decision to announce what they plan to do to build more supermarket competition, on Sunday, Finance Minister Nicola Willis, seen here trying to emulate Toni Collette in Hereditary, announced that the plan was to make an official request for more information, known as an RFI, on what it would actually take to bring in a third supermarket company to the country. That's right, we had an announcement of an announcement about looking for more information to make a later announcement. Winston Peters, seen here thinking he spotted a rogue rainbow at the United Nations and wouldn't have a bar of it, wait, did someone say bar? Has come under fire from people with brains after publicly criticising the CEO of Kiwibank for answering questions about diversity support within his organisation. By supporting diversity within his organisation, Peters demanded in his latest sundown moment that the CEO should be focusing on the cost of living, like voters have been telling the government to do for 18 months, while Peters accepts petitions from TERFs, demands a COVID inquiry based on the crywanks of conspiracy peddlers, villainised trans people, removed REC from schools, removed an updated therapeutics bill designed to stop charlatans selling snake oil, and cried about the dangers of woke and DEI. Minister of Workplace Relations, Brooke Van Velden, seen here waiting for you to come home and find out what she left boiling on the stove in an oversized pot, has announced sweeping changes to health and safety rules, claiming that they're cutting red tape, which looks suspiciously like a safety rail. Their first target? Road cones, claiming there are simply too many of them and proposing a hotline to dob in excessive road cone usage. What happens after they're dobbed in is anyone's guess, but Minister Van Velden said that they'd be taken to that farm out in the country, You know, the one your dog went to when you were 9 and they were able to play with all the other road cones and be happy and not worried about the drain on finances and resources this will take to do, when the public really just wanted some bloody action to bring down the ridiculously high prices that we all have to live with. After death threats made against Green MP member Benjamin Doyle were made this week, ACT Party leader David Seymour, seen here showing in the face he makes to scare off ghosts in a haunted mansion or low decile school, suggested the party report the threats to the mongrel mob, since last week the media blew out of proportion claims that they were calling for the abolition of the police. The Green Party has long held a stance that funding for some police services would be better spent on dealing with the drivers of crime, and David Seymour has long advocated people avoid going to the police when there are credible reports that shouldn't be ignored because of the harm that they can cause. Human Rights Commissioner Stephen Rainbow, seen here realising that a trans person won't get his job under the current government, has come under fire for anti-Muslim comments he made in a meeting with a diverse range of Jewish community leaders. The community leaders warned Rainbow that there is a difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and conflating the two can lead to people unfairly combining the two or targeting other groups, to which Rainbow went on to incorrectly proclaim that the biggest threat to safety in Aotearoa was Muslim fundamentalism. The most recent threat assessment report from the NZSIS clearly states that identity-motivated violent extremism is the biggest risk, then expanding about the risks of white identity-motivated extremism. The head of NZSIS, Andrew Hampton, seen here being a really good spy, has said the comments misrepresent the assessment. Said Paul Goldsmith, the minister who hired Rainbow, "Oh, that makes a lot more sense now as to why Internal Affairs recommended against hiring this guy when I put his name on the list and overrode their calls. Oh well, what you gonna do?" This week saw a raft of changes to income support and tax, which will see the lowest wage earners on a minimum wage gain an extra $165 million in tax cuts, while landlords will be dealing with a lower than inflation rise in income. Oh, sorry, I got that the wrong way around. April 1 saw interest deductibility for landlords rise to 100%, meaning an extra $165 million in their pockets, while minimum wage earners got a 35-cent increase, well below the rate of inflation. On Thursday, US President Donald Trump, seen here out of breath from lifting an oversized novelty sign, announced a raft of new tariffs, one of which was a 10% tariff on New Zealand products. The United States became our second largest export destination last year, and this could cost exporters over $1 billion a year in lost revenue. Said a spokesperson for MPI, "We knew when we sent Winston over there a few weeks back it may cause some confusion, since he's so easily confused himself these days, but we can't work out how they rounded up a 2% tariff we charge on 25% of imported goods to a 20% general tariff," as the president said. But he is the president, so we can't say outright he's just plain incorrect. It'll upset his friends running the government. Even the bit about slapping a tariff on the herd in McDonald Islands, which is inhabited completely by penguins, is something that we're not allowed to talk about. In the House this week, Health Minister Simeon Brown, seen here sitting at the grown-ups table for the first time, came under fire after refusing to acknowledge that abortion access was health care for women after it was revealed that some smaller hospitals were cutting back on women's health services. In response, Brown said, "It's only women's healthcare if it comes from the women's healthcare region of France." Of course I'm kidding. It's only healthcare if a conservative Christian male like myself says so. It was revealed by OIA this week that several Destiny Church groups, seen here overrunning a small community event and allegedly about to assault children they say they want to protect, had received over $40,000 in grants to raise awareness of COVID-19 within their communities, designed to help with health measures around the time of lockdowns. Despite openly telling his congregation and the public he was happy to kill a few of them by not following lockdown rules, the church accepted the donations. Said a spokesperson for Destiny Church, "Not only do we never face any consequences, we're quite happy to scam the government and public along the way as well to maximise profits, to help our legal funds to defend actual child molesters in our church." The Ministry of Social Development has revealed that it is currently declining 31% of all emergency housing applications, claiming it was because people had contributed or caused their immediate need for the housing. In March of 2023, it was declining just 3% of applications. Housing advocates, Aviva, formerly known as the Christchurch Women's Refuge, the Salvation Army, and the Community Law Society all pointed out that both circumstance and evidence points to some cruel decision-making processes in places that impact those fleeing domestic violence or finding themselves without accommodation. Said Louise Upston, Minister for Social Development, seen here describing the size of the pot you should leave boiling in someone's house to really freak them out. Nuh-uh. If people are fleeing a domestic violence situation and need emergency help, then they should have thought about that before they got themselves into that situation. Staff were left in tears at Kainga Ora this week after it was announced that the organisation was going to be looking to fire 16% of its workforce in restructuring to pay for tobacco company kickbacks and ferry build cancellation fees. While the Public Service Association has acknowledged it's going to impact the work the agency does, Housing Minister Chris Bishop, seen here losing all hope that the old SingStar microphones will still work, pointed out that with less social housing builds and for some really weird reason a huge drop in demand for emergency housing, there's just no need to have staff on to help people anymore. Māori Development Minister Tama Pōtaka, seen here trying to find out if the rumours that pens have candy-filled centres are true, has announced a raft of new appointments to work with a number of organisations tasked with helping the continued revitalisation of Te Reo Māori. These include Te Tura Whiri e Te Reo Māori, the Māori Language Commission, Te Matawai funding body Te Mangai Pāho, and Whakaapa Māori. Most surprisingly, not one of the appointments was an old white guy who's openly criticised Māori and supported the government for its anti-Māori actions. And finally, the country has been lashed this week by wild weather over the past 48 hours, leading to flooding, power cuts, cancelled ferries, and a crash on the Auckland Harbour Bridge. Said one Beach Haven resident, no internet, no power, just some quiet time with a good book, without the everyday onslaught of crazy, cruel, and stupid that's become a part of daily lives. Honestly, it's the best mental health I've felt in a very long time. Well, that's this week's The News. Thanks for watching. Look after yourself. See you next time. Hey, thanks for checking out this week's Omnibus. Every week feels like there's a whole bunch of crazy going on, doesn't it? But keeping yourself informed is a really good way to keep on top of it. I also know that we've got things like local body elections coming up fairly soon, so we really need to be on our game, otherwise we're going to have a whole bunch of crazy crackpots trying to get in. I actually found one today who's looking at running down towards Wellington, who believes that Barack Obama is actually Hitler's grandchild. So yeah, it's going to be a fascinating election. Anyway, before I go, don't forget to hit that like button or share the video, subscribe to the channel, or consider becoming a paid member so you can get things early and whatever other perks there are that are there. Like there's a twerking David Seymour emoji that you can use, which I think feels like the right thing to do today. Anyway, catch you later, live long, prosper, be one with the force, look after yourself, and I'll catch you next time. Hey, thanks for checking out today's video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe so you get more updates as we go along. We deal with these guys for the rest of the year.